We're here today to visit with Federal District Judge Leroy Hansen, talking about his life here in New Mexico and as a lawyer and a judge. Judge, thank you very much for undertaking this interview for the State Bar of New Mexico. I'd like to ask you a few questions first about your early life. Is there anything in your childhood or your early adolescence that influenced the direction that you took in your life?
Well, that was a hard scrabble time. It was depression, and I don't know that anything influenced the direction, but I became very cognizant of the need to work hard and make a living, because my father was a farmer in the midst of the Depression, and he had a tough life during that period of time, and he told me that he had worked for $1 a day for other people during the Depression when I was a little kid. So I'm sure that that maybe had some effect on my life, maybe in my focus on surviving, determination, or something like that. I can't really say.
Judge, where did you grow up? What town?
Near a small town called Audubon, Iowa, like John James Audubon, named after him, actually. And I went to a one-room schoolhouse. A few miles out in the country, and there were about 12, 15 kids in the school in 8 grades. My brother and I and my sister were all in the same schoolhouse with one teacher, and these were Depression times, and I have pictures of that group of school children, and people who see that often call it my Grapes of Wrath picture, because we're a pretty scraggly looking bunch of kids.
Standing in front of a one-room school?
Yeah, that's right. Everybody the boys had bib overalls on, and or these black tennis shoes. It was formative in many respects. We learned how to work hard.
Obviously, you went to high school. It was not in the same location. Where did that take place?
No, I was in the town of Audubon. It was I think my high school class was 80, 82, 85, somewhere in there. I don't can't say anything really exciting about high school, except that there were a lot of farm kids there, and a few city kids. Well, a lot of city kids. And it was hard to get to school in the wintertime. Sometimes we were snowed in. I remember having to stay with my aunt and uncle during the wintertime because there wasn't any traffic, any way to get to school if I didn't stay in the town.
I don't think Iowa is known for its mild winters, is it?
Well, it was cold then. And there used to be a lot of snow. I don't know that that's the case anymore. But it was an interesting experience living on the farm and milking cows and feeding cattle and hogs and gathering eggs and butchering chickens, things like that. Those things were everyday experience, and you had to do it before you went to school in the morning and after you got home.
After high school, where'd you go?
Well, I went to the University of Iowa.
And I believe you were involved in some athletics there, weren't you?
I was a walk-on on the wrestling team, and I wrestled a couple of years. Got a number of my joints messed up, and I was on the wrestling team for a couple of years.
I think I was known pretty much for having a strong wrestling team for many, many, many years.
Yeah, they did, but I was not a star. I was just a member.
And after college, what did you major in college?
I got a degree in mechanical engineering.
What led you into mechanical engineering?
Well, having grown up on the farm, you have to do all kinds of mechanical work just to keep things working. And I watched my brother before me, who also became an engineer. He was pretty skilled at dealing with these old tractors that we had, which replaced our horses, and they were pretty simple, and I got kind of interested in that. And he went to engineering school, and I thought that'd be a good thing too, so that's what I did.
After you graduated college, what did you do?
I came to Albuquerque to work at Sandy Laboratory in design and development in the nuclear weapons study there, or laboratory. And I worked there a couple of years, and then I went to law school.
Was there anything in your childhood or your adolescence that influenced your decision to move from engineering into law?
Well, I don't know that had any influence. I don't know whether there was any influence from my childhood or not, but I perceived the need to work with people as opposed to design and things. So I did.
How long were you an engineer?
Well, I worked as an engineer. I started in 1956 at Sandia, and I entered law school in 1958 in the fall. So it was just a short time, couple of years.
You went to UNM.
But I worked there during the summer while I was in law school.
Yeah, and you went to UNM?
Yes.
How many people were in your law school class? Do you remember?
Well, it was more than 50 to start with, but there were, I think, only 9 of us that graduated.
Really?
Yes.
What do you strike the attrition, or what do you attribute the attrition to?
They made it pretty hard to graduate then. It wasn't accepted that if you became admitted, you would graduate. And I think it was sort of trial by fire, which sort of gave those who graduated a attitude of work hard or fail. And I don't know that that's the best way to get an education, but it worked for most of us.
Who else was in your class with you?
Bill Snead,
Okay.
Jim Womack, Warren Reynolds, Gordon Burnell. Gordon Burnell has passed. Those are the only ones that I can
think of off the top of your head.
Gerald Cole.
Okay.
Gerald Cole was in my class. Bunch of nice people.
When did you, or where did you start working when you started off as a lawyer?
I clerked for State Supreme Court Justice Erwin Moist for a year. And following that, Bill Snead, who was in my law school class with me, and myself started our own little law firm. And we struggled together for 2.5 years or something like that. And learned a little bit, but felt that we could learn more with some experienced lawyers, and so we split off and went to work with other lawyers.
Bill went to where?
Art Ortega.
And you went to work with Dick Civarolo?
Dick Civarolo, right.
How big was that firm then?
Well, it was really Herb Cushing and Dick Civarolo and myself. It was a loose association with Dick Civarolo with Gino Matusi, and Pete Domenici was also in that association. And then eventually Paul Matusi became part of it, and then later Tom Bonham. And that grew to include, within a couple of years after I started there, Wayne Wolf.
Okay.
One of my greatest associates ever. And then we continued to grow little by little. And then eventually some guy by the name of Tom Daw joined our firm. But it was it was a great experience in that firm.
Judge, who were the professors or any other role model that you followed looking at how you were going to run your life as a professional?
Well, you know, I was very impressed with a couple of law professors. One was Dave Vernon, who eventually became dean of the law school at the University of Iowa, and Jerry Walden, who was he also became a dean in either North or South Dakota law school. Those were two pretty outstanding professors. Professor Weihoffen was a remarkable individual, hard to avoid criticism from, and
those days, people didn't tend to tell you what you did right. They told you what you did wrong.
That's true. There were a lot of good people that didn't graduate from law school, but there were some good people who, Gene Gallegos, who's a prominent lawyer here in New Mexico, was a year ahead of me in law school. There were only two women in law school while I was in law school.
In the whole school?
Yeah.
Who were those?
Well, I don't remember. I remember Julia Sutherland. She was married to Frank Sutherland, who was also in law school. They were quite a bit older. But I don't know, I can't remember the other lady.
Were they in your class or just in school at the same time?
No, they were ahead of me in school.
What particular courses did you think stick out in your mind? I remember I have the ones that were memorable to me. But
Well, I really enjoyed conflicts of law, which was a Dave Vernon class. Contracts, which was also Dave Vernon. I wasn't so carried away with torts, but I eventually started enjoying that later on. I hated tax. And maybe it was because I didn't like the professor, I don't know. But we formed the Natural Resources Journal.
that started off during your tenure?
Yeah, I was the first editor in
Really?
chief of the Natural Resources Journal, and that was a grind. But it's quite a thriving situation there at the law school now, the Natural Resources Journal.
What year were you admitted?
I was admitted in 1961.
And you were on your own with Bill Snead for several years, and then you went over with Dick Civarolo, probably 64?
Something like that. I clerked at the Supreme Court.
Well, that's right.
Yeah, right. You're correct.
Okay. And while you were in school, were you able to work? You said you worked summers out at the laboratories out here.
Yes, I did. I worked out there at the laboratories. They gave me a leave of absence for 2 leaves of absence for law school for some reason or other.
They thought you might come back as a lawyer.
Well, I thought about it. But the practice of law beckoned. And while I was in school, I did some legal research, law clerk kind of duties for Sutton and Jones. The man there who I was very fond of was Franklin Jones. He was a extraordinarily competent lawyer and and a real role model.
This is during law school that you did some work for him as a clerk?
Right, yeah, right.
Okay.
And we remained friends throughout his lifetime. And then, of course, Erwin Moise was in that same school, or same firm, and I clerked for him.
Well, talk about how your career developed? You started off with Civarolo and that firm, and were you doing plaintiff's work, defense work, all kinds of work?
Well, when Bill Snead and I practiced law, we took everything that stumbled in the door, and we got a couple of tort cases. We took one to the Supreme Court and prevailed, and it was a wrongful death case. And so I got an interest in tort cases. I had originally thought when I went to law school I might end up being a patent attorney, but gosh, I interviewed with a patent law firm in Chicago, and watching paint dry is more exciting than that stuff. So
Takes you right back out of the reason you got into law to deal with people.
Yeah, right, yeah. So, Dick Civarolo was an accomplished trial lawyer. Insurance, defense, tort defense, those kind of things, and so I did some of the business-related things that I had brought with me from the Snead and Hansen law firm, but I quickly got into trial practice, and that isn't at all what I had hoped to do when I went to law school. I didn't really intend to be in trial practice, but it happened unintentionally.
Judge, I think from talking to several former partners at Civarolo that you have tried cases all over the state of New Mexico, probably in almost all of the courthouses in the state.
Yeah, nearly all of them. That's true.
Can you recall any interesting cases that, as we sit here today, that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, there's quite a few.
Because the style of trying cases and the way I believe things have changed quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I'd like to hear about some of the cases that you were involved with.
Well, it's very... I would need to stop and get a glass of water.
Fine. I'll take a break. Judge, we were talking about cases that were interesting to you when you started off early in your career. Can you recount several of those for us?
Well, I'll start with one that just happened to involve my former partner, Bill Snead, and his associate, Art Ortega. Dick Civarolo and I were defending a lawsuit that they brought up in Taos County involving the Red River ski area, where during a summer period where they were operating the ski lift in Red River, a young man from Taos alleged that he had been thrown from the chair because it jerked. And so the other testimony was that he had been drinking and had a vodka or whiskey bottle or something like that on the ski lift. And he saw these young ladies from Texas going the other way. They were coming up, he was going down, and the testimony from them was that he tried to jump from his chair to their chair or adjacent to their chair, something like that. And there was a couple of other guys with him, and they were going down. The girls were coming up, and that was the other testimony. And he was a paraplegic. It was a very sad situation for him, and it was high damages potential, and we tried that in this old courthouse in Taos, which was then on the north side of the plaza. It's now an art gallery. And Art and Bill were very effective advocates, and so was my partner, Dick Civarolo. And the case drug on, primarily because the judge was a brand new judge who had just been appointed. He'd never presided over a trial, and he had been, his practice had been limited to probate. So he didn't know much about trials. I don't think he ever had participated as a trial lawyer. So it was really a strange arena for him. And the first thing that happened that is very, very humorous is we were arguing motions at night, and we started on Monday. Sometime during the week, we were getting rushed to get through before the end of the week, and the jail was right below the courtroom, and you could hear the inmates, the prisoners, singing, playing the guitar, and generally borracho behavior in the jail while we were arguing these motions at night. And then the case got finished all the evidence, and on Friday. So because the judge had no experience with jury instructions, he couldn't make a decision about what was the right set of jury instructions. And Art and Bill, the competent advocates that they were, had this theory that the ski lift was a common carrier, and they owed a duty of more than ordinary care, whatever that duty was for common carriers at that time. And of course we had the opposite viewpoint, and the judge just couldn't make decisions about that and several other things. So we started settling instructions early Saturday morning, and it was an urgent matter because the judge's sister had died, and he needed to go to the funeral on Monday. And so late Saturday afternoon, the judge couldn't make a decision, so he gave everybody's instructions. Everybody's. Conflicted though they might be, they were all given. And so it was late in the afternoon, and the judge said to the sheriff, who was acting as the bailiff, "Go get the jury." And so he started gathering up the jury, who hadn't been in a jury room. There wasn't a jury room. And he located all but one juror. And he came back and told the court and the counsel, "I don't know where he is, but I think I can find him." So the judge says, "Well, you go find him." He came back and he says to the judge, "The juror has been drinking." And this was kind of, drinking was a significant issue in the case, because we were asserting that the plaintiff was drunk when he tried to go from one ski lift chair to another. And so the judge says, "I'll go talk to him." And he came back in a minute and he said, "I think he's been drinking, but I think he's capable of deliberating." And keep in mind that he wanted to get this case over with before Monday. And so we said, "Okay, well, bring him in," and bring in the jury. And this juror came walking in. He was wobbling from one side to the other, and kind of a blank look on his face, and kind of having trouble with his balance. And all four lawyers stood up at the same time. And we said, "Judge, we cannot let this case go to the jury with him and his condition." And, well, okay. Well, we tried to agree whether we'd go with 11 jurors or not, and there was no way to agree on that. So we rescheduled final arguments for Sunday morning. And on the north side of the plaza in Taos County. And we argued the case on Sunday morning with all those conflicted jury instructions. And the plaintiff won, but it was not a very large verdict. And Mr. Romolo, who was the plaintiff, certainly deserved better, but he wasn't entitled legally to any more. It was a very interesting case. Another case that I tried to up in the same neighborhood was where a fellow who had been working for the Kandahar condominiums in Taos Valley had been charged with murder of a person in the Taos Valley. At night, Jack Smith, some wonderfully capable trial lawyer. You probably are aware of him. And a real rascal. Had defended this young man who was working for the Kandahar. And the judge up there didn't let the case go to trial on murder, but the guy was convicted of a manslaughter, and so what happened was there was a wrongful death case filed against him and the Kandahar condominium or hotel, or however it was named. And Jack Smith and I and Ed Piper got together recently and kind of reviewed the facts of this case because we tried it together. They were representing the individual defendant, and it was alleged that there's three young men who were in a Volkswagen in Taos Ski Valley in the middle of the night in the dead of the winter. And they had pulled off the main highway into the lane on the way to the Kandahar hotel. And there was a crank telephone that guests would use to tell the hotel staff that they were there and they wanted help getting to the hotel because there's snow and ice and so on. Well, there was some profanity on the phone when he picked up the phone, this defendant. So he pulled on his boots and pants and went down there without a shirt and carried his rifle with him. And he said he fired into the air as they were trying to get away. Turned out that the deceased was sitting in the front seat, the right front seat, passenger seat, and he had an entry wound in his chest, an exit wound in his back. There was a bullet hole that went through the rear of this Volkswagen and it shattered on the way through the engine compartment. And we knew that if we tried it in the same venue, that it was a pretty notorious case because this guy had already been convicted of manslaughter. So we got to change the venue, and Judge Musgrove from Aztec came over and tried it over in Gatone. And Jack Smith and Ed Piper made fun of me all through the trial, but we we had a great time, and we ended up getting a defense verdict with a 10-2 count in Catron County. That's Catron County, yes. That's one of them. One of those. I tried another case over in Clayton some years later. I've tried them in Aztec and Farmington. They had two courthouses, one in Aztec and one in Farmington, as you recall. Mm-hmm. I tried them in both places.
Well, Clayton Courthouse, as you recall, is, I don't know if you've been up there, but I tried a case there, and it was 1908, and the place has never been remodeled.
Oh yeah, I tried a case there.
Yeah.
I tried a case that the one in Raton is also
Well, that was an old WPA building.
right as the one in Roswell
Right.
is. That's been remodeled in Roswell.
Right. The other ones, though.
I've tried those. I've tried several cases in Roswell.
What'd you try in Clayton?
Oh, it was an automobile accident case. Interesting. I was going to have the state policeman testify, and I called him and I told him I'd be in town a certain time. I was going to fly in. He said, "Well, I'll be happy to come pick you up at the airport." And so he picked me up, and he dropped me off at the motel. A little while later, I walked down the street to get something to eat, and I had talked to.
We just lost the feed there.
I talked to Dolph Crable, who's Mr. Crable, who currently practices with the Keller firm's father. I went over and talked to him and asked him about the jury, and he said, "Well, I don't think I'd strike any of them. There's one man on this jury who he's had a couple of credit problems." And sure enough, I got a defense verdict, but the comment that I got from the bailiff, who was a deputy sheriff, I think, told me, he says, pretty hard to get a plaintiff's verdict here. He says there's a lot of high heels on that jury. That is a long time ago. This is a little different.
You didn't see women mainly on juries at all.
No, these weren't women.
And he's talking cowboy boots.
The cowboy boots that
Right.
he was talking about.
You bet.
And, well, the juries have changed a great deal.
How have they changed? That's an interesting observation.
Well, it's, everybody gets on the jury these days, and that's wonderful. Because I always tell the jury that it's important to have the cross-section of society making these important decisions about people's lives. Because they need to draw on their experience in today's society. The first case I tried ever was in federal court, which was in this building, in the wonderful courtroom upstairs. And that was in the days that people called federal juries blue ribbon juries. I don't remember that there were any women on the jury, but and I don't know that this was a blue ribbon jury, but Judge Rogers, who was a rather colorful fellow, was the judge, and he was quick to decide things and quick to act about almost everything. the case was that I was appointed to defend this fellow in federal court. In those days, when Bill and I started practicing law, when you became a member of the bar of the federal court, you appeared every Friday to get appointed to defend a criminal defendant or two. And I got appointed to defend this fellow from California who was driving a car cross country, and he was charged with the Dyer Act, driving a stolen vehicle across state lines, which is a very common charge in those days. And I learned in my interview with this fellow that, at least he said, he had a ulcer or some real painful problem in his stomach. And he said that he told me that when the FBI interviewed him after he had been stopped with a car that didn't belong to him, he confessed because he says, I'd say anything in order to get some medicine for my stomach. It was a terrible pain, and I would have confessed to anything. And so Lou Harris was the assistant U.S. attorney. You probably knew Lou.
I knew Lou.
Great guy.
Great guy.
He was the assistant U.S. attorney who was trying the case, and he had put the FBI agent on the witness stand and was about to elicit the what I contended was a coerced confession. And so I asked for an opportunity to voir dire the FBI agent, and the judge sent on the voluntary nature of the confession, or involuntary nature, whatever. And Judge Rogers sent the jury out. And the next thing that happened is, while I'm asking questions of this FBI agent about what my client had said, after the first couple of questions, he said to the judge said to the FBI agent, "Give me your file," because he had it right there with him on the witness stand. So he just handed it up to Judge Rogers, and Judge Rogers, while I am examining the witness, he wasn't paying any attention. He was reading the file.
Was there a jury, or is it judge?
No, this is the jury's out while I'm doing the voir dire.
Okay.
The jury's out in the jury room. And after a few minutes, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, man, it couldn't have been 10 minutes, Judge Rogers said, "Bailiff, bring in the jury." And
you hadn't finished your...
Oh, no, I was still struggling, grasping around for something relevant to say. And Lou Harris stands up and says, "Judge, can we have a ruling on the confession?" He said, "You're going to get a lot of rulings for in a moment." And the jury comes in and is seated, and he said, Mr. So-and-so, he pointed to the fellow in the front row in the jury box nearest to the judge. He said, "You, Mr. So-and-so, are the foreman." Bailiff, hand Mr. So-and-so, the foreman, a verdict form. Mr. So-and-so, sign that verdict form, not guilty. And Mr. Harris, don't bring any more of these kind of cases in my court. Or another case like this. It turned out that this poor fellow, who was the defendant, was actually employed by a house of prostitution in Los Angeles, and he was going to Kansas or someplace in the Midwest to bring back girls, and which was not the Dyer Act but the Mann Act. It was mischarged. In addition to the confession, the car had 2 or 3 other license plates inside, and the defendant had a half a dozen credit cards that weren't his. But he wasn't charged with any of those things. So I took the verdict form down to the marshal's office, which was here in this building on the 2nd floor, I think, and getting him released. And I said to my client, "What do you think of my first jury trial?" And he sank to his knees. Well, it was quite a stroke of luck for him. But that case is related in the book that is it's entitled "The History of Federal Courts in the 10th Circuit."
Really?
Yeah. Look under, if you want to read more about it, look under Judge Rogers.
Let me ask you a question, Judge. For the record, can you tell us when you were appointed?
Yeah, I was appointed in 1992.
And you were the last federal judge appointed by George H.W. Bush, if I believe.
That's
you?
right, yeah.
Using that as a reference point, both before and after, how has the practice of law changed as you've seen it, both as a lawyer first and then as a judge?
Well, at that point, I don't know much about the practice of law after that.
Well, let's talk about then. As the time you took the bench, how was the practice of law? How did that evolve up until 1992 from 1961? So you had a long career.
Okay, yeah. Well, as I've indicated, we didn't have uniform jury instructions. Every lawyer knew every other lawyer. One of my great friends was Bill Kitts, who was my constant opponent. We had coffee frequently in the morning in Maggotson's, which is
the old Hilton Hotel.
No, it was next door to the First National Bank building.
Yeah.
Then. Half the lawyers in town would have lunch there every day, and we all knew each other. And there was hardly a lawyer in the state that I didn't know when I was practicing law. And We were all friends. I knew lots of lawyers in the southeast part of the state and all over this northwest and the northern part of the state and Santa Fe. We were real colleagues, and I really think that there was a great deal of trust among us.
Did you have the discovery issues in those days that seem to prevail today?
What happened, which really messed up the practice of law for myself and my contemporaries. We had a negligence case, and we'd maybe take one deposition and go to trial. And the we wouldn't be reading out of a deposition. We might use a couple of contradictions of fact that appears in a deposition, but the discovery was minimal. That's what happened to the practice of law that resulted in no trials anymore. Nobody tries cases anymore. Very few civil cases are tried, and not a whole lot of criminal cases. But the civil trial practice deteriorated to almost nothing because the cost of discovery, the cost of litigation. And that all started in the 1940s when the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure broadened rights of discovery. And it became broader and broader every time the federal rules were amended so that you could discover almost everything except the opposing counsel's birth records. And we all, as those rules became looser and looser with respect to what you can do and not do in discovery, the lawyers took advantage of it. In my judgment, there were two reasons that happened. One, lawyers figured out that they could make more money if they took a lot of depositions and then sent out a lot of interrogatories. That was one reason. And the other reason is that sometimes you'd find something that you could use even though it might not be dispositive. But it made the cost and the reason for trials elusive. The reason for trial was elusive. The cost of trial was prohibitive. And I've seen that get worse and worse and worse throughout my legal career.
When you started, were lawyers keeping time records? On tenth of an hour and that kind of thing?
Some lawyers. I had an acquaintance who used to say he could pick up a file, kind of test how much it weighed, and decide how much to bill. Other lawyers, as you recall, perhaps, that there was a wonderful lawyer, a very capable lawyer by the name of Joe Rail, who pioneered uniform billing practices. And so much for a will, so much for preparing a complaint, so much for an answer. And then there was the famous case where the Supreme Court of the United States said that was unconstitutional.
Judge, who were some influential people in your career when you started off in law?
Well, of course, I've told you about Franklin Jones was prior to my starting, but I've also mentioned Bill Kitts, who I admired a great deal. I had a good relationship with a number of other lawyers. I had great respect for George Harris. R.E. Thompson. I knew him well. He was a fine lawyer and still is.
I was going to say, you put R.E. in there with those people that had already passed away, and I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, that's right. I'm having trouble recollecting the names because there were so many that I used to litigate with.
Let me ask you, who were some of the judges that you recall that you thought, as you've been on the bench, that you kind of looked to as far as the way they handled a courtroom? Or
Paul Tackett ruled the courtroom with an iron hand. He knew what he was going to do, and he was going to get people to settle a case if he could. Judge McManus was the judge with humor. I thought a great deal of Judge Maloney. He was a good man. Let me think. Judge Bratton was. I had so much respect for Howard Bratton. He was a fine man. And I didn't know him as a lawyer, but he was an excellent judge. Santiago Campos was a great trial judge on the state court bench and on the federal bench. I tried many cases before him in each jurisdiction.
What makes these judges stand out in your mind, apart from being good people? What makes them stand out as great?
Smart.
Okay.
Judge, let me say that Judge Campos was one of the best judges with evidence that I ever tried a case before. Judge Bratton was a very patient and judge who always listened and was very considerate of the parties' and the lawyers, and he was most of the time, 90% of the time, he was right on things legally. Evidence and the law was very good. I thought he was a remarkable judge. Campos was not only a good judge, but he was a lot of fun to play golf with. And I played golf with him before and after I was on the bench. And a very interesting thing about Judge Campos, when he made an evidentiary ruling, he would almost every time would add a number of comments about why he ruled that made it bulletproof. He was a smart judge. Yeah, he was a smart judge. And he was a straight judge. I mean, I thought he was wrong a few times when I lost in his courthouse, in his courtroom, but, you know, that's what happens when you...
The better reasoned view didn't prevail.
Yeah, that you know, he was fair, and I tried quite a few cases before him, and later became an admiring colleague. I have a plaque over there, a picture of myself and a few other the federal judges that he sent to me and signed on the back of it. It's kind of a joke. You can look at it afterwards.
Okay.
Judge Zinn, who was a judge in Gallup, was a very good judge. He knew how to handle a pretrial conference better than any other state court judge that I was in front of. I tried several cases with Judge Zinn. And when you went to trial with Judge Zinn, you knew that you were going to get good rulings, fair to both sides, and it was according to a pretrial order that was well written in. Excuse me. He was the only state court judge that I knew in those days that had written pretrial orders, and he would dictate it. And his court reporter would type it up, and it would be signed before you left the courtroom. And it might be several pages long, but it was done.
But wasn't in the order, didn't get into evidence.
There was another judge in Santa Fe state court judge who eventually became Supreme Court Justice, Judge great judge. Hispanic. This is what happens when you get to be my age.
It's out there, you just can't find it.
Yeah, it's in there. But I tried some cases before him, that were pretty remarkable. I tried a case before him in TA, Tierra Maria. It was a very simple automobile accident case. And the plaintiff was Spanish speaking, and we had to use an interpreter. And, he was on the witness stand. And the jury was probably all Spanish speaking as well. And the plaintiff's attorney was Spanish speaking. It was somebody that you know. And there was a time during the translation of the plaintiff's testimony that Judge Montoya, Sam Montoya, was a great judge, really a good judge. Anyway, during this testimony, he stopped and he spoke to the witness in Spanish. And the witness answered him in Spanish. And I stood up and I said, Judge, you and everybody else in this courtroom may know what's going on, but I don't. I object. And he started laughing. That's one of the few times I've ever seen a judge laugh on the bench. But it was remarkable because he and everybody else in the courtroom got carried away with speaking Spanish. And in TA, that wasn't unusual.
What have you seen since you've been on the bench as a change in the profession, law profession, since you've been on the bench? Which I've got to say, it's 18 years now. It's hard to imagine it's been that long, but
the most remarkable thing is that there are probably more women than there are men, and they're darn good lawyers. I've had some remarkably talented female lawyers appear before me, and their legal work is as good as you can find. And I have law clerks who are women, and I am absolutely delighted to have them.
Well, I believe you brought the first woman lawyer into the Civarola firm.
I did, yeah.
How'd that work out?
Well, she was a remarkably good lawyer and hard worker and a strong personality, and that's one of the reasons she got by. She got by so well in our firm that had a lot of strong personalities. She had a strong personality, and she used it very effectively. We had some remarkably good women lawyers in that firm. Cynthia Fry is now a state appellate judge. I was responsible for hiring her. And Nan Nash, I think I was responsible for hiring her. I know I was responsible for Carl Butkus, Dennis Johns,
Kathleen
Kathleen
was the first, Kathleen Liebeck.
Randy Logan. But we were talking about women.
Mm-hmm.
It would be wonderful if more women would be able to spend their entire careers practicing law instead of taking a year or two off for childbearing and raising. But they're working it out, you know. A lot of them are doing it and doing a great job at it, and I'm really impressed.
How do you see the profession having changed as a result of more women
You know,
practicing?
I don't know that it has changed.
Okay.
There are always been good lawyers, male, and now a lot of good lawyers, both male and female. And there are those that are not so good. Unfortunately, we've had a few lawyers that have substance abuse problems that has caused problems for the bar and the reputation of the legal profession. But that's been a problem for professionals in the legal profession for years. There were lawyers who had alcohol problems before drugs became a problem.
Do you see any more of a problem now that there's more lawyers as opposed to years ago when there were fewer lawyers in the bar?
Well,
percentage-wise, about the same.
Well, what kind? You mean problems?
Well, professional problems.
Professional problems. Well, I think there's less camaraderie, which and less lawyers who are acquainted with other lawyers, and that promotes, in my view, a lack of civility in some situations. I do not have a problem with civility in my court. But I know that it happens. It's rare. I've only had a couple of lawyers who were abused, were abusive of other lawyers and parties and me. That's not a problem in the courtroom generally, but I think it can more easily become a problem between lawyers who are not have not known each other for a long time. And you got a lot of members of the bar. I don't know how many there are. How many are there?
I can't tell you right now, Your Honor. I don't know.
Well, I know there's
a
several thousand.
Yes, more than several thousand.
Yeah.
We probably get close to that in town now.
Yeah, I know we do. And, I see somebody new in almost every case that is filed. Not every case, but in many cases. So another lawyer that I have not heard of.
Other than the cases that you've related that you tried early on, are there any particular cases that come to your mind as far as landmark cases in which you've been involved? Or significant cases, if not landmark cases?
Well, there's one case that I presided over, which was a jurisdictional question involving Indians. United States versus Sosi, which was the question of whether or not the federal court would have jurisdiction over a controversy in Indian country between Indians. And the facts were very interesting. There were two Indians. They both claimed ownership of a quarter section in Indian country. The defendant was a woman who said, "Well, I've lived here all my life. My mother lived here, same place all her life. Both of our umbilical cords are buried on this land. It's ours by reason of Indian law, Navajo law." And the other Indian involved was represented by the United States Attorney's Office. They filed a lawsuit on behalf of this other Indian. He was a very elderly man. I don't remember his name. And he claimed ownership by, I think, some written document. But I couldn't rule on Navajo law, so I remanded it to tribal court. And it's a landmark decision, and it was affirmed in the Court of Appeals. That's a very interesting aspect of the law. We don't have jurisdiction. There was a couple of cases that I handled, presided over, on civil rights affecting Indians. One was a Isleta Indian woman whose husband was not an Isleta Indian. And somehow or another he irritated, offended, or whatever, the tribal council. They didn't like him living on the Isleta Pueblo. So they banned him from the Pueblo. And she was an employee of the tribal government. She worked in the police station or in the law enforcement. She wasn't a policeman, but she worked there. They fired her because she complained about them banning her husband from the Pueblo, and so she filed a civil rights complaint citing the Indian Civil Rights Statute, which does not give anybody any civil rights, unfortunately for her and the title to the law. And I had to dismiss that case and a similar case in the on the Hickory Reservation. It wasn't exactly the same, but it was similar. That's a very interesting problem because Indians do not have civil rights with respect to their own society unless it's off the reservation, off the Indian lands. And it's troubling, isn't it?
Very much so.
I mean, we're a country which really is proud of our civil rights. I've had an awful lot of Indian cases involving Indians and Indian land and Indian funding. One that's still pending, and I'm not going to discuss it except to tell you that it was filed about 20 years ago.
Really?
And it's still pending.
Still pending.
It's a class action case. And the class included all of the Indian tribes in the United States and their funding.
Wow.
By the federal government. And which is a remarkably complex
I would imagine.
Case. And it's there's been some settlements in it, but
without getting into the case at all, how did it happen to be here in New Mexico if all of the different tribes throughout the country are involved?
A lawyer from Santa Fe was representing an Indian, part of an Indian tribe over in Navajo country, and he was very knowledgeable about the funding requirements or laws for Indians, and he filed an action, and it became a class action. He was originally representing a portion of the Navajo Nation, and then it became a national class.
Still have one lawyer on the plaintiff's side? Same lawyer?
Oh, no. Oh, countless lawyers. We almost needed a class for just the lawyers. Well, that's not quite true, but there were lawyers from Alaska and eastern United States and some very, very good lawyers. And it was filed against the United States. Another Indian case that I had that was eventually settled was regarding the Indians who were deeded, had deeded lands in and around western in New Mexico and even into Arizona. They got deeds to their property that excluded mineral rights from the government when they were originally patented. The patents reserved the mineral rights to the United States. And this happened early in like 1912. That's when it started. And there were a number of, that continued on up into the 40s, as I recall. I can't recall exactly, but that is a very complex case because an outstanding lawyer here in town was the plaintiff's lawyer in that case, and he got a class action that was approved by Judge Campos before I came on the bench. And Judge Campos, being so generous as he always was, transferred it to me when I came on the bench.
That's the benefit of being the junior judge?
Yeah, that's also how I got the Rama case from Judge Campos. But this case involving the class action or mineral rights involved many mineral exploration companies, mining and others, oil and gas. Can you imagine?
Humongous amount.
So am I taking too long?
No. Just want to make sure we're still on the tape.
Okay. That's a very complex situation. And the Justice Department lawyer who was handling it, we had a hearing, and I wanted to get the case moving, and this is quite a few years ago, and she said, well, Judge, I don't think you have jurisdiction because this case should be in the Court of Claims. And I'm going to file a motion contesting the jurisdiction and suggesting that it be either refiled or transferred to the Court of Claims. And I said, okay, you got 6 months. Do it. 6 months came and went, and nothing had been filed. So I wrote letters, whatever. She prevailed upon me to give her another extension of time, and a year went past from the original meeting, original hearing. So she filed a motion that did not address my jurisdiction. And she also made a false statement about what had occurred in the interim. In
the year period that you've been waiting.
Yeah. And so I entered an order to show cause why she should not be held in contempt, and the Justice Department sent her and 3 other lawyers out here to address it. In the meantime, the plaintiff's attorney had filed briefs and had addressed all the things that she said that she was said she was going to do, and in addition to this brief that she filed, or motion and brief that she filed, that did not address the issues that she said she was going to, and that was a lot of work. So they came out here and they said her immediate supervisor, after she spoke for a while, her immediate supervisor rose to defend her, and he said she's a great lawyer. She's never done anything like that. She's got a wonderful record. His boss said something the same. His boss said something. There was 4 of them, and then there was local U.S. attorneys. lots of lawyer power. The local plaintiff's attorney, who is a remarkably good lawyer, said, "Judge, I have a brief that I'd like to file with you about her and about this, and I'd like to file it in open court." And I said, "All right, I'll take it under advisement. I'll let you file your brief." In his brief, he cited she and her bosses had said she had never had a problem in any federal court. In his brief, he cited 2 cases with opinions in which she was held in contempt in federal court. I find the Justice Department, actually it was, I made them pay for all of opposing counsel's expenses and all this controversy about what had not happened and the delay and all that. It amounted to about $37,000. Judge DiGiacomo, I called him in at the next hearing. I called him in. Did you know Judge DiGiacomo?
Yes, sir.
A wonderfully capable man. A little bit over the top sometimes.
That's what I was going to say, Your Honor.
But he knew how to get cases resolved. And I called him in. I was having a conference, status conference with all the lawyers, which did not include the lady who had previously been in the case. She somehow disappeared. But Judge DiGiacomo settled that case. I don't know how he could have settled that case. There were so many different interests. Indians, mineral companies, coal companies, mining companies, and he got it settled. Now, I'd probably still be working on that case if it hadn't been settled.
Well, Judge, you made a few rulings there that might have had something with them deciding that they probably needed to review how they were going to try the case.
Well, they had a loser because it was the government had really been unfair with the patentees.
Were you not the judge on the silvery minnow?
No, that's Judge Parker.
Is that Parker?
Yeah, if you want to talk about that, you got to go upstairs. He's got these little sardine cans that says silvery minnow on it.
You've done a number of those cases that you've talked about. Can you tell me some of the other ones that you recall that are significant cases now?
I had a case involving the highway between Roswell and Ruidoso. It was rebuilt a few years ago. I don't know if you know that.
Right. Been on it.
That's a beautiful road now.
Yes, it is.
It wasn't too bad a road before then. It was winding and it was a beautiful drive. But there was a lawsuit that was filed, I believe, by an environmental group against the highway department, contesting the building of the road between Ruidoso and someplace maybe 30 miles east of there. A complete rebuilding of that road. And that was a very, there was a lot of public controversy over that road. Environmental groups, people living along the road, business groups who wanted the road, farmers or ranchers who really didn't want the road.
Why was it in federal court?
It was in federal court.
Why was it in federal court?
Well, it was...
Did it cross federal land? Or?
No, it was federal highway, and it was... they contended that it was federal funds, first of all, and it was contended that there had not been an adequate analysis of the impact on the environment in which the road was to pass. So it was an EPA problem. And there was lots of controversy over that. And it's not my favorite kind of case to try, because it was examination of volumes of administrative records that caused me lots of nightmares. And anyway, I let them build the road.
Other than that, are there other cases or attorneys that you can recall of particular note in courtroom instances as you've been on the bench here?
I don't like to use names of...
Okay, we won't go to...
I can probably give you the name of that lawyer who in that case. I've got it.
Can we take a break here?
Yeah, let's take a break.
You can sit.
I'll jump.
Judge, I'd like to change direction a little bit and ask you, as a judge, what have you found to be the most difficult part of being a federal judge?
Well, that's pretty easy, because part of my responsibilities are in criminal law. Trying a criminal case is not all that difficult. It's just another trial. And the issues are limited. Civil cases can be much more complicated, as I've already mentioned. But in a criminal case, you've got, if there's a guilty verdict, or if the defendant pleads guilty, I've got to sentence that defendant. And during my first month or two on the bench, I went to see Howard Bratton. I said, this sentencing is... I says, that's really tough. And it is tough. And he said, if you were to say that it wasn't tough, you're not the right guy for the job. And I think about that so often. This morning, I had to sentence a lady who was convicted, was an alien, and had been convicted of a felony, a substantial penalty. She had served a lengthy sentence for the drug case, and She had been deported, but her all of her family live in New Mexico. They're citizens. She's not. She had been deported, and she re-entered after having been deported subsequent to a felony conviction, which is a big deal. And I got a letter from one of her daughters, which included a photograph of her and 3 sisters. Beautiful girls. Very well written. That's a tough deal to sentence somebody. And, I don't know how many of those cases I've had. The illegal alien reentry problem is an enormously difficult situation for judges. Another difficult problem that I and every other federal judge faces is sentencing in violent crime cases in Indian country. And this is a particularly sad situation because there's a great deal of alcoholism in the Indian country. I don't have any knowledge whether that has anything to do with their genetic background or not. I don't know whether it's any worse than outside the reservation. I don't know that. But I do know that of all of the cases that I have presided over regarding violent crimes in Indian country, they've all arisen out of alcohol. It's not just the perpetrator. It's often both the perpetrator and the victim. Some of the ugliest crimes you can ever imagine, myself and other federal judges have to sentence people for violent crimes arising out of alcohol abuse. Rarely drug abuse, but that happens sometimes. Trying to do that in a manner which satisfies the purposes of sentencing is a very very, very difficult thing. It's so emotional for everybody in the courtroom. You may or may not remember Lloyd Larson, who was an employee of the BIA, who was driving a BIA pickup on I-40 the wrong way. And he collided head-on with a vehicle from Nebraska, and that had 2 retired farm couples in it. They were in their 60s. And think about having about 30, 40 relatives from Nebraska in the courtroom. And each of the decedents each of the victims have the right to have a relative speak to the court before sentence. That'll tear you up.
I'm sure. Let me ask you a question, Judge, about something I've heard out here. Where do the Federal District Court of New Mexico stand case volume-wise with other courts in the country?
Oh, we're high. We're one of the highest. Maybe the first or second. And that is primarily because of the proximity to Mexico, because we are in the traffic pattern for drugs and human smuggling. And human smuggling is a bigger problem than many people understand, because it is one of the cruelest things that you can possibly know about, because these smugglers get somebody or get people to pay them to bring them to the United States. Then they lock them up in a place where they can't escape, and then they extort money from their relatives in the foreign country from which they came, and they may be starved or without significant personal care, and then they're carried off to another location after they've extorted money or gotten promises. And one of the cruelest things you can possibly see, and there are many of those cases. There's an awful lot of alien cases, but it has been somewhat moderated the last couple of years. What happened was, 2 or 3 years ago, they had the Mexico National Guard went down on the border for 3 months or so, and that seemed to have taken the pressure off for a while, and it has escalated again somewhat, but it's not nearly as bad as it was before then.
What would you like to be remembered for on this bench as your contribution to the bench here?
Well,
I mean, you're still here, but you've got 18 years on the bench.
I don't know that I've had any more or less contribution than any other judge. I feel that my attitude about the job is one of dedication to being prepared and doing it right. I don't know whether that's my reputation or not, but I'd like it to be that, because I like to think I'm prepared, and my law clerks like to think I'm prepared. So they generally have me prepared. I might make mistakes while I'm on the bench, but I'd like to think that I've tried to be prepared and ready to do things. I'd like people to recall me doing pretrial conferences that resolve 85-90% of the legal and evidentiary issues before the trial starts. I did that yesterday from 1:30 to 5 o'clock in a case I'm going to try in a couple of weeks. We went through every exhibit that was listed by either side, every witness that was listed by either side. I dealt with every legal issue that had been raised and raised another one myself. And have ordered briefs be filed on that. I like to have the parties know what they're going to be faced with in the courtroom. And that is a very important thing for a litigant. And I hope I will be remembered for that, if nothing else, is being prepared and making the lawyers prepare. And you know, in today's litigation, when it gets as far as a pretrial conference, in a case involving things like workplace hostility or gender discrimination, those seem to be extremely complex. And if you don't have both sides understanding the issues and the evidentiary questions and what they're going to be faced with in the courtroom, somebody's not going to get the best trial they could have. And I think it's important for a federal judge or any other judge to make sure that the lawyers and the parties are prepared to go get into the courtroom.
Okay.
And if I can't get people to do that, then I failed.
Change direction a little bit about your family. You have several daughters.
2.
That's right. Tell me about your daughters. What are they up to?
Well, they each have 2 children. They each have a boy and a girl. They both live in Albuquerque.
Oh, do they?
All 4 grandchildren live within a 10-minute drive for me, maybe 5 minutes. No, 10 minutes. And I'm proud of my daughters, my sons-in-law.
What are your? I can't recall. I remember meeting them years ago.
Mm-hmm.
What did they do before they got married?
Oh, well, Julie was a teacher, and she's not employed now. My other daughter picked up my interest in photography and has become a talented photographer and has a business in photography.
Here in Albuquerque?
Yeah, here in Albuquerque. And she's, I like to think, is pretty talented.
Which carries me to your next issue. What do you like to do in your free time? Do you have any hobbies?
Well, yeah, I used to play golf. You knew that.
Used to ski. I remember that.
I used to ski. A few years ago, I was not able to get back up off the ground in the Taos Ski Valley when I was skiing with my daughter and my granddaughter. And they convinced me that I should not do that anymore. So I quit. My legs are not in great shape. And so I don't have the strength to ski. I used to fly fish. I've had to quit doing that because my balance is so bad. But still, I love to read history. In my American history, New Mexico and Southwest history. I've done a lot of that. It's my favorite subject.
Tell me about
And I walk my dog
every day.
3 miles every morning.
3 miles?
Yeah, except when I got to be in court.
And you say you have a problem with. Okay. Do you have any words of wisdom for young lawyers?
Yeah, I do. Be honest to your client. If they got a problem that you can't solve, you tell them. No matter who your client is. Don't tell your client just what they want to hear, because usually that's wrong. And be prepared, know the issues, and don't forget your oath.
Okay. Judge, I want to thank you for taking the time to visit with us today. It's been very helpful, and we're done.
Okay.
We have a release we'll need you. I sent you over, and you can look at it. But I didn't know if there's any you can put